as I'm talking right now, like I am at this moment. But I'm going to dedicate the show to every kid who comes from a divorced family. I am one of them. My mom and biological father divorced when I was about 9 months old. So I spent all of my life in the two household world as a kid. And, it's not always easy. Matter of fact, it was very difficult for me and my brother. And so for anybody who's going through that or has gone through that, this show is dedicated to you. And hopefully when we're done talking with Regina, you'll get a better understanding of ways that if as an adult and you find yourself in a situation where you're going to need to get divorced, there's other alternatives outside of making it confrontational or antagonistic. So the podcast, where you can hear it anywhere that podcasts are heard, pretty much. I'm on 12 or 13 different platforms: iTunes, Pocket Cast, Anchor, you name it, you can find it. My book. So I'm on a mission now to make sure I promote my book every single time. My Brothers Love a Memoir. I am writing the sequel to this book. The working title is called The Accidental Speaker, which is basically the second half of my life and how the journey after writing the first book, where my life's gone and how I got to where I am. Regina is very talented. She has many different skill sets, all of which lead her towards the mission she's on right now. She was a family law attorney. She is a high school history teacher currently. And she also is the founder of a divorce coaching service that allows parents about ready to get divorced to find a new way to separate in order to not traumatically impact their lives and other people involved in this process's lives. So without further ado, my good friend, Regina, how are you?
Thanks. I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for being on the show.
Sure. It's my pleasure. You did that really. I like that. Like a woman of many talents. It sounds good.
Listen, that's what the host's supposed to do. He's supposed to
that's what
really
you're saying.
Cool
Build me up. But that was, and I liked your dedication as well, because it's really true that the big reason that I love what I'm doing is because when I was practicing traditional family law, there was not very much avenues, not very many avenues to really feel like you were actually helping these families and especially the kids. And that's why I had gotten into family law as a young, fresh attorney right out of law school. I thought I can feel like I'm really helping these families. And what I found was that the system just didn't support that. It's actually built up to be the exact opposite when people go into the divorce, go into the courthouse and start that ball rolling through the divorce system.
Yeah, I'm getting that feedback again. Let's hope I can get rid of that.
Yeah, you sound okay on my end.
All right. Well, hopefully if anybody is watching on Facebook, if you can hear that feedback or if anything sounds wonky, I think that's a technical term,
yeah.
Wonky, put something in the comments just so I know. Being a cop, I see that's a lot of times the prequel to the divorce,
right,
as well as what's actually going on during divorce and post-divorce. So I can tell you that the need for someone like you is vital to the success of the family unit, whether it's separated through divorce or they mediate and find a way to stay together.
Right.
Having somebody who can navigate both the legal side and the emotional side is really important.
Right. I feel like when couples come to me, I sit them down and they do get the benefit of the legal side. I say I'm like half lawyer, half therapist. And the beautiful thing too is that when the traditional model is each party gets their own lawyer, and that lawyer is duty bound by the rules of ethics to, advocate for their client in the most diligent way possible. And they're not always saying to that client, maybe you don't need to take it that far. Maybe we can, stop here because it's really going to be, in the end, more destructive to push. You might win in the end, but what's the cost involved there? And I worked with a lot of fabulous attorneys, but I also worked with many, many attorneys who had no interest in having that conversation with their clients, and take the position that I'm getting paid to do what my client asked me. And if my client wants to file that silly petition or have that silly fight, they're paying me, I'm going to do it. And I think that really, without someone like me involved, the success or failure of your divorce process hinges on who you hire as your attorney. And if you end up with an attorney who's got no interest in communication or no interest in looking at the family unit as a whole because they have a allegiance just to one party, it brings people down this very long, arduous path that's extremely costly in terms of finances and emotional cost. So I'm really gratified because I get to be half therapist, half lawyer and say, I know how hard this process is, and I know that most of the anger that people are feeling is coming out of a place of grief and fear, really. And we acknowledge that, and I get both parties to acknowledge it. And then it softens the whole conversation when both parties can acknowledge that, I am heartbroken, even if I'm the one who said I wanted the divorce or pushed that divorce. There's still incredible loss there for all the dreams. Anyone who's been through a divorce knows the dreams that you had and the family unit that is going to change. But instead of having clients who are mad and grouchy and broke at the end of my process, I am lucky enough to get letters, thanking me, and notes and text messages all the time saying, I couldn't have done this without you. And, this was unusual. I didn't know what to think, but I'm so glad that I decided to give this a shot, because people think, I'm not sure this is the way to go, because we're so conditioned for hundreds of years to just fight. And it's natural if you go into the psychology of it, that it's a fight or flight mode. When someone tells you they want a divorce, you go into self-protection mode. And that is kind of getting you off on the wrong foot in terms of your divorce process. Can you hear me okay on there? Yeah. No, I can't hear you. Poor Matt. I can see him, but so I'll just keep talking about how my process works for people who are thinking, I don't know, this sounds crazy. But what my most frustrating experience is when a client or potential client will call me and say, I don't think I can get my spouse to be on board with this. And to that, I say, well, if you don't think you can get them to be on board, you're dealing with someone who is purposely choosing to move forward from a place of fear and anger, sometimes hatred, but purposely choosing to move forward in their life at that moment from the most negative stance that one could possibly take. And they are supported in that approach by society and by the system. There's no question. And so I encourage clients to say, well, let me have one conversation with them. Let me talk to them about how this works. And they've got nothing to lose, because going to someone like me, I do the emotional coaching and the mindset piece of it, as well as the mediation piece of it. But even a regular mediator is going to advise you to never sign anything unless you have a private attorney look at it. Nothing is binding until it's signed. And so going to someone like me is really a no-lose proposition. It cannot ever hurt to try and put your family on a positive path versus proceeding from a place that's your most, the lowest human emotion. So sometimes I have clients who come to me only because of the promise of saving themselves some legal fees. And that's a valid reason too. And for those clients, yeah, for those clients, they've got nothing to lose because they're saving themselves money and time. And ultimately, that's going to be a better emotional position for the whole family. And any dollar you save on legal fees is money that you're going to really need to set your family up in two households to get yourself on solid ground. And that's really where your focus should be. How does the entire family end up as stable and healthy when this is over as possible? So, you know, I don't really feel like there's too much of a downside to at least investigating and giving this approach, this new approach to divorce, a shot. I don't know if Matt can still hear me. Kenny? I lost his audio. So, but he's saying, keep talking. I can talk forever about this, Matt. So you've got like the perfect guest for no audio, because when you think about, you know, how we all got to this point, it's also easier for people to understand why what I'm doing is timely. And I think society is ready for it in 2019, because the divorce model that we're working off of is literally from the Middle Ages. Okay, so the, you know, earliest European or earliest Western history social models where a woman was given away in marriage for political or allegiance, military strategy reasons, literally. And so those marriages were incredibly important to her family for financial reasons. And as time went on, obviously the woman had no chance of a voice in that. But
can you hear me now?
I can, as a matter of fact. You're good. So, but,
hold on.
You want me to hold
Everybody,
on?
thank you so much for being patient, and thank you, Regina. My mic went completely wonky. Again, there's that technical term.
There you go.
But what I want to do right from this point forward is I want to ask the one question I ask every guest, and let's do this the right way. We'll make this longer if we need to make this work. But I appreciate you being a fantastic fill-in solo host while I was.
I've got plenty to say on this topic.
As I always say, I can unfuck anything in about 5 minutes.
There you go.
I had to quick figure out how to do this, and all I did was reopen the app in a different screen. So the question I ask every guest is, who is Regina De Angelis? Who is Regina De Angelis?
Well, she is certainly enthusiastic. I feel like Ferris Bueller. I think that's a Ferris Bueller quote. But certainly enthusiastic and passionate about a lot of things. But I'm really just, you know, Delaware County Italian girl at heart. I know. I just shout out to all my Delco friends and family who still live there. But like, so I come from a very simple kind of salt of the earth background where family was the most important thing. My parents are still married after 48 years, and I have a big, loving Italian family where we all supported each other. And there's been a couple of divorces throughout the years in that big Italian family, but in all of those divorces that were modeled to me as a child, those ex-spouses were still welcome in that household. And when my sister got divorced, her ex-husband and now her ex-husband's new wife, they are all, you know, kind of part of the big extended family. My children hang out with I don't even know what the relation is. My ex-brother-in-law's wife's children, you know, they have gone to concerts together and things. So that was the model I had. And my own divorce, you know, wasn't that peachy. My ex-husband, I think there's a lot of pain there, though. It's losing that big family. Sometimes it's easier to separate yourself rather than constantly be involved and reminded what you might not have anymore of your loss. But I so kind of a model of unconditional love and support as a kid growing up. And I think all kids are absolutely entitled to that. And that's who I am. I have a lot of fun in my day-to-day life. I'm the mom of 3 great kids, one of them who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So that is an additional stress on the household. That was a stress on my marriage. But I have some perspective. I can kind of relate to anybody because of the challenges and the path that my own life has taken me on, for sure.
So you brought up, I'm getting that feedback. Dang darn.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. If that continues on, we may have to cancel this one and come back on again, but I think it's still preparing. I don't know. That storm we have going through, I think, is screwing up the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me hold on one second. Let me. How about now? Any better?
I think you sound fine on my end.
All right, I'm going to go with this. I think I'm not hearing the feedback at the moment, so we'll let this go.
We'll keep going.
So you brought up a couple of key points, I think, that rang true to me, is that you went through a not so fantastic divorce.
Right.
Right. And then you also have 3 kids, one of which has a physical disability.
Right.
That is challenging to anybody, let alone a marriage that maybe isn't on solid ground.
Right.
And then life takes on its own course when you're going through that. Like you change from being a lawyer to a teacher to an entrepreneur, and so many things happen throughout that process. Where do you think the aha moment was for you when, you're practicing family law, you're literally listening to everybody's shittiest stories known to mankind,
right,
on a daily basis for 18 years, you said?
Yes, 18 years.
And then all of a sudden, what was the moment that you said, I can't do this anymore?
I'm done. When my son was diagnosed, it was 10 years ago this past June that he was diagnosed. And at that point, there was an incredible grieving process there because of what the prognosis is. And you've got this beautiful, healthy boy, and they tell you what his future is going to look like. And there honestly was 3 solid years that I couldn't talk about that without crying. Anytime anyone said, "How are you?" I'd be burst into tears. But during that time, I noticed myself getting less and less empathetic towards my clients who would come in with their stories. And they see me smiling, being professional. They don't know what's going on in my personal life, but I'm in my head thinking, oh my God, if you only knew how lucky you are and that you are wasting so much time fighting over this, was essentially trivial in most cases. And that was when it started. And then when, as my son got sicker and started to actually lose some of his physical abilities, then it got to be clear that I needed to be as positive as I could at home because it was challenging. And I didn't want to bring the toxicity of my job into my home life any more than I really needed to. So I had been an adjunct professor at Widener Law School in Delaware when my youngest son was about 10 years, all about the same time. I had the opportunity to be an adjunct professor, and I loved it. I loved seeing that aha moment on my students' faces, and the contrast was so stark between what I was doing during the day, and then I was going to the night school at the law school and teaching students who were really interested and engaged and loving what they were doing. That contrast between the positive and the negative made me know I had to get out of my traditional law practice. And I really didn't think I was going to ever go back to law. And I became a history teacher at a high school here locally, and I love it. But people, everyone knows I'm a divorce attorney, right? So the coaching business grew up organically because I'm at that age, I guess, too. You've been married 15 to 20 years and people start, throwing in the towel, or the kids are finally old enough that they feel like they could handle that transition. So many people started coming to me saying, hey, could you just help me with this or help me with that? And so I decided to formalize it into my business, which is called Family Transitions, Divorce Coaching and Mediation. Because it's really got to be looked at, I believe, as a transition, a sad ending, but transitioning you into a next phase that can be certainly wonderful.
I think that a big part of the world today is the transitional component to anything, like coming out of the military. There's a lot of people that are helping people transition out of the military in the civilian world. There's services, coaches, mentors, people like that to do that. So there's in any extreme to another extreme, if there isn't a transition component, if there isn't somebody that helps guide you through that process, it's very difficult for people to see the forest through the trees, so to speak. And I think that the cool part about what you do is that you're providing, you've been there, done that.
Right.
You know the best practices, from the legal standpoint, the emotional standpoint from having been divorced, you understand what it has on the kids, especially one with a disability. You are literally, if you could check every box on someone who could help transition somebody out of marriage into divorce and do so in a way that is the least disruptive, it's you.
Right. And that's what I hope. And people, I think, also, when you've lived it yourself, this is just my experience. And so it's the only thing I know. It's not until I start talking to other people that they say, oh, wow, that's really helpful. Or I never thought of it that way. Or they really are lost is the best way to say it. And so it seems maybe very straightforward to me, but for someone who hasn't lived my experiences and never thought that they would be in this situation where they're getting divorced and having to figure out how to start over, it can be monumentally overwhelming and terrifying. And that's where I start with my clients. What is your most terrifying thing? We narrow them down. And then I say, okay, we're thinking about nothing else. Don't worry about anything else until we've taken 3 or 5 steps to handle this most terrifying thing, to put it to bed or to rest for now. We might have to come back to it down the road, but that expression, frozen in fear, is absolutely true. And they just don't know what to do first. And so I do think it's very helpful for me to sit them down and, number one, make them recognize a commonality immediately, that they're both in incredible emotional pain. The second one is always, you both want to be great parents and you want the best for your kids. And then they might have different perspectives on what's the scariest to them, but it's usually almost always for the breadwinner losing that nest egg or not being able to retire. And for the spouse who's dependent, it's how am I going to pay the bills? So then that's kind of an easy problem to attack too. So we know that fear is different ends of the spectrum. So then we start working towards the middle on that so that both parties have some level of comfort. And once we've hit that, we can start talking about the more practical nuts and bolts of the divorce and the assets and things.
I think one of the biggest fears people have is, my wife is a stay-at-home mom, and we made that choice that we were going to have one person influencing our children every single day and not handing them off to somebody and getting them for 2-3 hours a night and hoping that we can teach them morals and integrity and the lessons that we want them to learn in that short period of time. So I love my wife more than anything on the planet, and she'll have to kill me to get rid of me.
Yeah.
But, God forbid if anything were to happen, she doesn't, even though she has a profession, that she has a degree and all that stuff, she could go to work. But ultimately, I'm the one that is the income earner.
Right.
And I've seen it a million times as a cop. And we separate, especially if we go on a domestic, we separate the parents, the mom and dad, and we try to calm them both down separately so that there's not this yelling back and forth and accusations flying and whatnot.
Right.
The biggest fear that I see is this, it's almost this feeling of they're stealing from me they're leaving me or they cheated on me, and then whichever one has the assets or the one that was the breadwinner feels like they're being taken from, and that whatever they worked hard for is no longer theirs.
Right.
And how do you overcome that feeling of if there was a single event or a traumatic event that caused the separation of marriage, how do you then overcome the feeling of loss to the person that was the provider? And then how do you, on the other side of that, negotiate the mindset of the person that's going to be receiving that assistance so that it doesn't feel like she's being vindictive or he's being a vindictive person?
I really do sit them down at and as we go through the mediation process, and basically tell them at the very beginning, process is only going to be successful if you guys agree that obviously neither one of you was perfect in this relationship. But what I tell them from my experience, and they could roll their eyes at me if they want or not, but what I tell them is, in 99% of cases, a marriage does not fail. They never fail because someone intended to be a horrible husband or a horrible wife. Everybody's out there doing the best they can with the emotional tools that they have at that moment. And you bring your past into your marriage, which I've seen many marriages and probably my own, where that is part of what causes it to disintegrate. But so I tell them, look, we are not going to, in this mediation, dive into how you got here. But we are going to acknowledge that you're here now because you agree you want to move forward in a way that's healthy for your family and minimize the damage. And once I get them to focus on the present, going back into the past is not ever healthy. Anybody can very quickly fall down into that blame, accusation phase. There's no place for that in the room when I'm there with my clients. Then we also, to get to your next point about the fear of losing that stuff, we have to validate that fear. And I think when the spouse feels heard and they feel like they're understood, and then they can come to believe that the other person isn't out to hurt them financially. The goal here is for you both to be okay. And so you're going to be willing, if you're in my room, to maybe give a little bit more or take a little bit less than what the court or the law says you might be entitled to. But when you do that, I've had cases where I've seen a husband, I've seen it go both ways, where the husband will say to the wife, they'll look at the support numbers and he'll say, I don't think that's enough. I don't think you can pay the bills on that. And I'll stop there and say to the wife, you've got to recognize the goodwill that should be garnered. If he's willing to do that, then we need to look at some of these other things to acknowledge the goodwill that is being extended there. And I've also had wives say the exact opposite. Well, you can't afford that. I'll just get rid of my cell phone plan and get a different plan. And it's really those small little steps build goodwill that allows the process to feel very much more cooperative, as opposed to some judge or some lawyer is telling you how it's going to be and what your financial situation is going to be.
Do you find that the people that come to you are already more interested in an amicable process than, say, the ones that are so angry and spiteful and pissed off over whatever caused the end of the marriage that they want to just go after it for blood? Do you see a difference between the two since you've been on both sides of that?
Yeah, I think that I do think that people seek me out on purpose. I don't know if it's necessarily because they're of a more emotionally intelligent mindset where they want to try and do this amicably, or if it's for financial reasons. Because part of the way I market what I do is by saying you're going to lessen the stress and the attorney's fees associated with your divorce. But I have found that often one client will come to me because they've read something that I wrote and love the message that, this is one phase in your life and you're going to be okay. And they drag the other person there by saying, this is going to save us a lot of money. Usually I get the other person on board, because when I lay it all out and I say, look, my mediations from start to finish, you could be in and out of there in less than $5,000. But if you go to get a private attorney and both of you get private attorneys, you're each going to need to pay at least a $3,500 retainer up front. And if you're downtown, it's going to be more like a $6,000 retainer. So that family is out $12,000 before one thing happens. That's just to have someone pick up the phone and say, hey, I represent so-and-so. So it's my approach in terms of the cost savings is dramatically different than what the system would be. So I get a lot of people on board with that carrot.
That, no matter how you look at it, money's money.
Right.
Right? It's a real thing.
Right.
And when people, I always tell people the hardest thing to do is get somebody who's angry, not angry.
Right.
It just is. When
it's time and
it's logic doesn't necessarily always compute.
Right. No, it doesn't, I don't think.
Do you ever find yourself is there ever a time when you're going, I just can't get these two to find that middle ground? Do you ever bring the children in as because I'm just thinking, I would have as a cop had the kids come out and just sat them both down and said, let's talk. Look what's happening right here. Look at your children's face.
Yeah.
The police are standing in your living room. It's 11:30 at night. They should be in bed. They have school tomorrow, but yet they're hearing mom and dad scream and chuck stuff at each other.
Right. Even just listening to you say that. Yeah, it's horrible. That putting your children through that moment that they are never going to forget is just horrible. I don't physically bring the children into the room, but what I do say is, look, you guys, the one marriage vow that you are not going to sever with a piece of paper that says you're legally divorced is till death do you part if you have kids. Now, it's like you are stuck with each other, and even if you hate each other right now, you are going to have grandchildren and they're going to have a first birthday party. And imagine you don't want to put your adult children even through the stress of having their child's first birthday party tainted because their parents can't be in the same room together. And so I make them think, this is just one moment in your life. You have a long road ahead of you of monumental occasions and happy celebrations. And you don't want the negativity of this divorce tainting every happy moment that you have coming down the road. And so I don't physically bring the kids in, but I do say, they're tying you together.
Painting that picture is important.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think, as with anything else, when I mentor kids or when you're counseling clients or you're teaching your students, right. The reality is that, and we talked about it before the show, that your life is a journey, and by proxy, your mission fits nicely into the 2 dates and a dash theme, meaning that, you got married one day and you're going to get divorced one day. If that's the situation you're in, but the reality is that you're actually together for as long as you're both alive.
Exactly.
If you have children that are if you share children together. And what you just said is so poignant in that, one thing I can relate to with my mom and my biological father. My biological father was incapable of being a father. He just didn't have the gene in him. It wasn't a nasty divorce. He paid his child support every month on time. Now, granted, my mom never raised it from the day he got divorced until I was 18 years old. It was $300 a month for that entire time.
Wow.
But there was never any animosity. And my mom was very good at making sure that even when we were having problems with our dad, she always defended him as our father. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important in a relationship, that while you may not be together anymore and you may not be in love and you may not cohabitate and share life together, you still share a common bond. And if you can have at least that common respect for the fact that you each play a role,
right,
that's vital.
And I think children, and you could speak to this more than I could speak to it. I don't know how often you were seeing your dad growing up, but my heart breaks for the children who's have lost a parent, or whose parent really has kind of stepped out of their life, because I worry that those children just subconsciously or by human nature are going to then develop an insecurity or question themselves, like, well, you know, why wasn't I enough? If they loved me enough, they would have stuck around. And so I think both parents need to recognize how vitally important the other is in the life of their child. And they both played different roles, I think. I mean, there is some of that. I know fabulous fathers, and I know several fathers who do both roles. But I do think that I am not as good at talking about sports with my son as my ex-husband is, as his dad is. And they have a bond over that, you know, but I have a bond with them over going to Longwood Gardens and, you know, talking about the yard and, you know, big Sunday dinners. So it's just different. And they each have so much to contribute to creating a well-rounded individual.
And I think regardless of the divorce situation, whether it's, I'm going to try and get rid of this back again. There we go. Whether it's you're still married or you're divorced, like my children, I'll give you an example. I have a 21-year-old daughter in college, and she will call me for certain things, and she will call her mother for certain things.
Right.
Needs validation from her mom on, you know, what to cook when she's, you know, she's an athlete. So knowing healthy recipes and boyfriend issues,
right,
that kind of stuff. She calls her mom for. For me, it's athletics, it's training, it's how much sleep do I need? How much should I do of this? How much should I do of that? What protein should I take? And that would be the same way whether me and her mother were married or divorced.
Right.
And I think that's important to know, that I think at the end of the day, if you're two people and you don't have kids and you don't like each other anymore, get divorced, go away from each other.
And then definitely don't spend years doing it. If you don't have kids, just move on, you know.
Right. But when you have that kid component, there's just so many potential pitfalls. If you don't, if someone isn't, if you can't see the forest through the trees, if someone's not there to show you the picture of what life is going to look like if you go down the wrong path. Right. It's just like being a mentor. Like I had mentors growing up. Yeah. You're helping somebody who doesn't yet know what they're doing. Right. How to navigate something. Just like when I was 16 and I got arrested and I got a mentor who was a cop who said, this is where you're headed. Right. You're exactly right. Right. And that's and I think it doesn't matter. This is part of what is frustrating for me too, in terms of the year that we're in 2019, is that I don't feel like society fosters this attitude that these children, you know, we should have. Amicable isn't maybe the best word. I mean, you don't need to be best friends, but mutually respectful divorces that keep in mind that the children need both parents and that both parents have a role to play. And in 2019, we recognize and honor all sorts of families, and families of same-sex families and surrogates, and you choose your family, right? It doesn't have anything to do with biology. But when it comes to a couple that's getting divorced, society questions like, well, why would you be friendly with your ex? Well, that doesn't really make any sense, when they should be saying that's just another form of family. You're still going to be a family unit. It just looks different than the traditional 1950s family unit. What do you think thus far in and how long has it been since you started the business?
It's only been a couple of years since I've been actually doing the coaching and mediation.
Do you see that you've two-part question? Have you found your sweet spot as far as how you have these conversations? Has that evolved from being the lawyer version of yourself to this new version of yourself, where you have a little bit more of a counseling mentor role in massaging these directions, versus you work for one half and you're going to go do what's best for that half, and damn it if the other half wants what they want, we're going to fight for what you want. You're actually playing both roles. So number one, have you really gotten into a sweet spot with that. Number one. Number two, have you found that the outcomes from your transition have been as you expected them to be now that you're a couple years into having clients?
Yeah, I think, well, the sweet spot is I'll take that one first. I'll do them in order. That's a little bit harder because every couple is different. And even though from the divorce lawyer standpoint, this is and part of what's different between the divorce lawyer and the mediator or the coach really is that a divorce lawyer, your case is a business transaction. We're looking at dollars and cents and we're not getting involved in the emotional piece of it. When I get these couples together and for the very first mediation session, the emotional trauma that each of them are bringing to the table is different in every case. And one of the things that I found that really works well with everybody is to say a little bit of what I had said before. Nobody intended for this to happen. Everyone is doing their best. And a lot of times one party is blindsided by this divorce coming. And I say to the party who is pushing the divorce, you need to give them time to catch up emotionally. Okay. So in the mediation process, it can go as fast or as slow as you want, but definitely you need to give the party who's been surprised by it time to catch up emotionally. And they need to understand that I think society has almost set up marriages to fail because there hasn't been enough support for the family. And especially men, probably, I'm hoping my son's generation is the first generation where this isn't an issue anymore. But most men up until my generation are raised that your job is to be a good provider. And they kill themselves to be that provider. And then the woman wants the man to be a provider and an emotional support. And there's that piece missing there where the guy is working his tail off and he's traveling for business and he's coming home exhausted. And he walks in and his wife's, I laugh because I can relate, like his wife's angry and he doesn't know why, but she's angry for something that she came across in the house that day and he wasn't home to help her fix it. But so society doesn't give people the tools to deal with that situation. So they end up sitting at my table like, I did everything I was supposed to do. I worked my tail off. I paid all the bills and she's cooking dinner and running the kids all around and it still fails. And so we talk about that and get them to kind of release the blame of themselves. Like, what did I do wrong? I wasn't good enough. And release the blame of the other person. Like, this is not anybody's fault. This is just life in the 21st century, like eats you up and spits you out sometimes. And
I couldn't agree. So I'm going to give you a little Matt Cubbler marriage advice.
Yeah.
So you and I, we have the luxury of seeing the worst of everything.
Right.
We've seen the negative side of divorce. I've seen the in the home stuff. You see them as pissed off and as full of venom and vigor as they could ever get, and they want revenge. And when I decided I was going to marry the woman of my dreams, I realized two things. Number one, that if we didn't communicate in the very beginning as to what the expectations are from each other, then we were always going to be playing catch up, and someone's always going to be not understanding or not speaking the same language. So from the very beginning, I created AORs. In the military, areas of responsibility are huge, right? So coming from the military background, I said to my wife, I said, we need to have areas of responsibility.
That's awesome.
And she's like, okay, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, here's the deal. Like, if the grass is high and you're looking out back and you're seeing the grass is high, and I'm looking out back seeing the grass is high, and we're both looking at each other, who's going to cut the grass? That's going to cause a fight.
Right.
I said, but if my responsibility is the grass, you're going to look out in the backyard and say, hey, dipshit, grass is high. Time to go mow it. And I don't have an argument to that because it's my responsibility.
Right.
And without areas of responsibility, there's no real blame. And then there's no real making amends.
Right.
Like, there's no way to say, I'm sorry, you're right, I screwed up.
Yeah.
So we literally had a checklist on who did what in our house, who was cleaning, who was doing all this. And we set that, and I said, here's the deal. This is gold. This is setting in gold. This is never going to change because these are the things I'm good at, and these are the things you're good at. And that's how it works. So we set that up from the very beginning. And for we've been together since 1994, married since 97. So 22 years of marriage and 25 years of being together. It's not failed. So that's number one. That's my first thing.
Right.
Second thing I always say is that in that, even though we had those areas of responsibility, that our relationship has evolved in that she went to work for a period of time. I had one job. Now I have 10 jobs. Like things have varied. And some of those responsibilities did shift from one column to another. But they were discussed.
Right.
And I think the key to whether you're passionately in love for the rest of your life, or you're going to go through the highs and lows of any relationship, and you're going to be super in love at certain points of times, and some days you don't even want to look at them.
Right.
But the reality is, if you're committed to the process of marriage, because marriage is as much of, and I'm speaking to the choir, but marriage is as much of a contract of an agreement that you want to cohabitate.
That's right.
And co-raise a family.
That's
and
true.
During that time, you love in that feeling of I'm going to be there for you, love.
Right.
Whether it's great or shitty.
Right.
And I think that's important.
It evolves, and like you're saying, it's different from year to year and from month to month. And like December's super stressful, but April we go on vacation or whatever. And so, but you've got to feel like that other person has your back no matter what those twists and turns are. And what I always thought was so important, and what this is kind of off the topic, it's more like from a personal perspective, but I always used to say, like, if you come home from work and I'm grouchy and miserable, don't like snap at me and but that's not my normal personality. So I wanted someone who was going to say, like, hey, what's going on? Are you all right? Or how can I help? But it's just was lost in translation. But I think that communication, which is done in a way that's non-accusatory, non-judgmental, can make the other person feel really nurtured and taken care of, as opposed to being accused of failing in their responsibility, whatever it was,
I've always believed that the minute that if you're going to change the rules of the game and not tell the other players,
right,
that's when things go sideways. And no matter what, and I have a distinct ability to be able to understand human behavior and body language. So my wife can't have a bad day without me figuring out what's happening.
Knowing, yeah.
Neither can my kids. And so it's a little bit of a different dynamic with us than it is for maybe a normal couple who doesn't have my idiosyncrasies. But I think that the ability to understand the expectations of one another, the expectations of what your marriage means to you and what it means to the other party, and being able to voice that without it becoming a conflict.
Right.
And I think doing that in the times when it's not bad, so that information is out there for everybody to digest without the cloak of being pissed off about something.
Right.
Clouding your judgment, I think is just super important. When I go on domestic calls and I can tell either that they're together because financially it's the only reason they stay together is because financially it makes sense.
Right.
And or one feels stuck because the other is a bully or
controlling the finances or something. And that's what I have. I think that's also those communication patterns that people fall into that aren't healthy. I think that's part of the reason why it's so valuable having me in the room also, because I've had couples who I'll hear the husband offer something that, certainly come off of their position and like move closer to where I think the wife wants to be. And she's still angry. And I think because they're not wired to actually hear each other anymore, like they hear what they're used to hearing or what they expect to hear. And so I can say, no, hold on. Like I heard him say, blah, blah, blah. I think he's actually agreeing with you. Or I think he's actually moving closer. And then they're like, oh, maybe, but they're just not wired to hear each other that way anymore after 15 years of being in a negative pattern.
And that negative pattern is a real thing.
Right.
That's
entrenched. Right. And something else that you said, one of the biggest things that I see that causes divorce is when you said if someone changes the rules of the game and the other person isn't aware of it, that is probably the scenario in the vast majority of my cases. The nastier divorce tends to be ones where there was an affair or someone has an addiction issue that isn't being treated. Those divorces are really hard. Mental illness, it's really hard. But most divorces where the parties like grow apart, it's just simply that one person has changed personally their patterns, or they've evolved into something different. They've taken up new sports, new hobbies or interests, and that other person isn't moving along with them, and they can't figure out how to support each other in their differences now, so they decide that they're going to separate at that point.
One last question. If I can get this feedback to go away. How about now? That's better.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Being a mom of 3 kids, being divorced, being a high school teacher, and now doing this side business.
Right.
You found yourself from the time that when you got married and started having kids and the end of your marriage happened to where you are today. Are you a more confident and happy person now that you've come through that full circle? And do you see your success as an entrepreneur being attributed to the ability to rise above and come out of a difficult situation? Do you think that's fed that in a positive way? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, my set point is extremely happy and optimistic, always. So that mindset and resiliency that I just believe in my core, I know I'm always going to be okay, helped me weather my divorce, and certainly helped me develop the ideas behind my practice. Like, I can help other people going through this same thing by teaching them simple mindset tools to overcome the fear and really move through this. But all of my experiences leading me to here have definitely made me more confident and secure in who I am. And I feel so blessed because right now I ended up in this weird place in my life where I have 2 jobs and I'm a single mom, and I'm kind of live in this money pit house, but I am so fulfilled and I love both of my jobs. So both times, often I'm exhausted and school gets stressful. It's really kind of ebbs and flows which job is taking more of my time. But I am always feeling like I'm making a positive contribution to the world and putting out into the world as much positive energy and optimism and hope as I can. And that was something I never got the luxury of feeling when I was practicing regular family law. It's usually was the opposite. If I was doing my job really well, somebody was really unhappy. I was causing somebody unhappiness. I think it's a luxury to be able to say, I love both my jobs and both of them are making positive contributions.
I think that's a pretty profound statement, because the reality is you were doing a job that was, while you were good and your client who hired you
right,
appreciated what you were doing. But the reality is that there was another side of that where someone was very upset and you weren't getting prayers that night in his household or her household.
Exactly.
So I think that fulfillment component, while financially, people, at least the idiots like me who think doctors and lawyers make millions of dollars, but at least the financial side of it may have been better when you were in a law firm. But I think there is something very valuable to being fulfilled. And I think that is one of the things that when I talk to people that are entrepreneurs or have been through struggles, is that they get to a point where they find that fulfillment and they find that happiness and they find that purpose.
Right.
And I think, through having been a lawyer, having been divorced, having switched your profession to become a teacher and having the ability to see the adults in the mediation coaching environment, and then being with kids and inspiring and helping kids who, whether people want to believe it or not, teachers get told stuff about things at home.
Right.
And especially if you're a teacher that is very engaging with your kids and you listen to your kids and you're trying to help them navigate the teenage years in high school. At some point in time, you're going to have a kid in your classroom crying because of something that's happening outside of school that's manifesting itself because they got a D on their test.
Yeah, absolutely. This happened to me in May, but right, it does. These kids are under an inordinate amount of stress, and some of it they're putting on themselves for, pressure to excel in all things. Some of it's coming from their parents, but a lot of them are struggling with really that plus really difficult home situations. And school is their safe haven in a lot of cases.
It's unfortunate it's the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And but it's been that way forever. It's just that now with media and podcasts and life, that everything is out in the open, whether it's intended to be or not.
Right.
And everything is instantaneous, which means there's no you can't hide behind anything anymore. At least emotionally, you can't hide behind stuff. You can pretend to hide behind your Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, but in reality, it's at some point in time, and probably in a much quicker fashion, people are going to find out the truth about what's going on in your world.
Right.
And it can be intrusive. It can be devastating for kids to know that mom and dad are going to get separated and divorced, and then the impact that's going to have in their, while it may not be real, but they believe to be real in their life. As far as their social network, what people are going to think of them.
Yeah. And that's what, for a lot of kids, that impact is real. But I think one of the benefits of what I'm doing is trying to lessen that impact as much as possible. To say to the parents, your kids don't have to be carting their stuff back and forth to school because you want them to get off the bus at your house. There are no rules about how a divorced family looks. You guys create what's best for your family. And if you stay out of the system, you can create anything that you want and be as positive as influence as possible on your kids and move forward into a really nice, hopefully someday blended family situation.
Well, personally, I wish to God we wouldn't have had the audio issues that I'm having. But I can tell you that I think what you're doing is noble, number one. It's something that no one is doing that I've ever heard of. So when you told me, I believe it was Jen, was it Jen Groover? I forget who made the introduction.
I think it was Jen, yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's unique. And because it's ultimately what, as police officers, last thing we want to do is arrest a mom or dad. We don't want to take them out of the house in front of their kids. We don't want to have, court orders being enforced. We don't need to have sheriff's deputies showing up and serving PFAs. And there's just so many negatives to divorce intrinsically that happen once you're in the system.
Right.
And I think the ability to bypass, while some of those system created functions have a purpose in some situations, I think by and large, the majority of divorces don't require the police in your house and a judge hanging things over your head. So for me, I think what you're doing is amazing. Hang tight. I'm going to close out the show real quick.
Thank you. Okay.
We're going to talk offline. But everybody, thank you for watching this episode of the Two Dates in the Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you again to my very good friend now and an amazing person who's doing great things to help the family unit survive post-divorce, Regina De Angelis. And, if you are a family that is going through this, if you are a kid whose mom and dad are going through this, there are solutions out there. There are alternatives out there. And if you're of an age where you have an influence in the divorce process as a teenager or someone who's going to be a part of that process, I highly recommend that you look for Regina and try to get mom and dad in to see her so that they can work through this process without completely destroying the family structure, and hopefully identifying the fact that, as you said earlier, at some point in time, those kids are going to end up growing up to get married, hopefully have children.
Right.
And at some point in time, there's going to be parties, there's going to be marriages, there's going to be things where both parties need to get together. And if they can do that with smiles on their face and love in their heart, that's a better solution for everybody.
For sure. For sure.
Everybody, thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you.
And be kind to one another.